Islam's Theft of Europe. Again, this is Abn Alhuriya, Son of Freedom. This will be part 7 of 7. Recent phenomena symptomatic of the coming of Eurabia. Freedom of speech on the decline. The passage of UN Resolution 1618 is being implemented in member states of the European Union, making it a crime to criticize or analyze Islam. Geert Wilders, Minister of Parliament in the Netherlands, was prosecuted for publishing his movie Fitna, which juxtaposes scenes of Islamic violence with Quranic verses. Tommy Robinson of the UK is jailed on a 13-month sentence for making a live stream report on social media on a sexual trafficking ring in front of a courthouse where they were being sentenced. Jada Franson and Paul Golding are sentenced for 36 weeks and 18 weeks respectively for their activities related to Britain First, an anti-Islamization organization. And I have seen recent videos of Paul Golding. It appears that he is out now, but he is being harassed through the bureaucratic process. Paul Weston, UK politician, was arrested for reading aloud in a public square Winston Churchill's views on Islam. This showed how far to the left the UK has drifted. Marine Le Pen has been arrested for showing video clips of murders by ISIS. She was charged under the argument that her posting of the images incited terrorism. This is the now common argument from the left that terrorist acts come from incitement by non-Muslims, not by Islamic actors' doctrine. UK now has at least 80 Sharia law courts. This happened under Tony Blair's government. The number of no-go zones in Europe is large and growing. These are areas which non-Muslims cannot enter without risk of attack, in which even the local police must enter in force. They are areas which, in a significant sense, have become Islamic territory in the host country. France alone has about 800 no-go zones. Rape gangs have raped thousands of European women all over Europe. This comes from Islam's view that an uncovered woman is asking for it, and Islam's low view of the kafir, that is the infidel, that tends to dehumanize the kafir and thus promotes the rationalization of violence toward the kafir. The leftist media and bureaucrats prohibit the public airing of the last statement. The existence of the UK sexual trafficking, euphemistically called grooming gangs, was uncovered by journalist Andrew Norfolk. It is conspicuous that the sexual trafficking of UK girls had been going on for years, and that the authorities covered it up. Tommy Robinson's crime was to expose this complicity. There are documented cases of UK police turning the other way when fathers directed them to gangs preying on their daughters. There are documented cases of UK police prosecuting victims of sexual trafficking rather than the rapists or traffickers. These egregious failures happen because the wish to avoid being called racist is more powerful than the impulse to protect children. Officials throughout Europe have consistently euphemized or minimized terrorist violence to avoid being smeared as racist by the left. Robert Spencer and Pamela Geller, well-known critics of Islam, have been barred from entering the UK, while the UK citizens who have fought for ISIS have been allowed to return without consequence. Geert Wilders was temporarily barred from entering the UK. As the percentage of Muslims increases in target nations of Europe, the more often politicians will cave into their demands to get votes. The birth rate of Muslims is much higher than the feminist native European couples. It is a matter of time before Muslims will outnumber native Europeans. Martin Sellner, Brittany Pettibone, and Lauren Southern, young anti-Islamist activists, were barred from entering the UK. The number of terrorist acts per unit time is gradually increasing in Europe. The EU has continued to have porous borders, which has allowed unbearable numbers of Muslim immigrants from Africa and East Asia. This has led to social dislocation and social unrest. This comes from policies set by the EU. Some suggested policies to stop the Islamization of Europe. 1. Close the borders. Too many terrorists are embedded in the incoming immigrants. But, less obviously, non-terrorists have their first political commitment to the Ummah, not to the country of domicile. This is a recipe for civil war eventually. 2. Deport all Muslims who are not yet citizens of the host country, unless they have clearly renounced Islam, that is, apostatized. Even so, the doctrine of taqiyya, that is, deception in Islam, makes such a policy risky at best. 3. Reclassify Islam in law as a political doctrine which happens to speak a religious language. Non-assimilation is commanded in Islamic doctrine. See the references on the screen. 4. Recognize that Islam has a mandate to dominate the world politically. This is the meaning of caliphate. Number 5, recognize that mosques are not merely places of worship. They are beachheads of Islamic civilization. This follows from the fact that Islam is not merely a religion. It is a civilization or political movement or political ideology. Public policy toward mosques should take this fact in mind. Recognize that sedition is taught in mosques. This is because jihad is taught in mosques and jihad is sedition. 6th, dismantle departments of Islamic studies. Locate Islamic studies courses in other departments taught by Westerners as well as Muslims. Islamic studies departments are centers of propaganda. 7th, rescrub school textbooks to show the sordid history of jihad and to not conceal it. Debunk the myth of Andalusia. Debunk the myths of the Islamic origins of science and even of Western thought. 8th, bar the entry of Saudi money into Western universities. 9th, shut off purchase of Middle East oil. Move to electric and fuel cell cars. Phase out gas-powered cars on a 10-year schedule. Migrate to wind, solar, geothermal, and tidal power. Require Muslim immigrants to assimilate or be deported. Develop measures to implement this policy and to deport Muslims who fail to meet these metrics. It must be remembered that faithful Muslims are required to avoid assimilation. See these references. The doctrine of taqiyya teaches that a Muslim may deceive as to their intention to assimilate. See the references on the screen. This is why it is better and simpler to deport all Muslims unless they have apostatized. A Muslim who has genuinely apostatized will be a refugee in the true sense because they are under a death threat. A non-Muslim from an OIC country can be viewed as a refugee because all non-Muslims are persecuted in Muslim countries, if only as a dhimmi. And let me pause here and just make this remark. You may be thinking in the back of your mind that it's inhumane to not admit Muslims, but you're operating with the assumption that Islam is merely a religion. Once you understand that Islam is a civilization and a political ideology as well as a religion, then you can see that these policies can make sense in protecting your national identities. And I'm speaking primarily to you Europeans, but this also applies to the rest of the West. Debunk leftist narratives which enable civilization jihad. Retake and dismantle all no-go zones in Europe. Gang rape or acid attack should get heavy prison sentences followed by deportation. If a terrorist is shot dead by police in the course of a terrorist attack, the body should be interred with pig entrails. This is because Islamic teaching holds that any Muslim defiled with pig parts cannot go to Jannah, that is paradise. This will be a disincentive to wage terror attacks. Each nation-state should review all internal policies which were driven by actions within the EU. Any policies which are found to erode the national identity should be revoked. Either the EU should be disbanded, or each nation-state should review whether, in the interest of the preservation of national identity, that nation-state should pull out of the EU. Think tanks should deconstruct the theory of multiculturalism and should deprogram policies which are driven by multiculturalism. Policies should be set in place to foster the development and preservation of healthy families in the West. Policies encouraging childbearing and child-rearing should be put in place to prevent the Islamization by higher birth rate. And let me make this suggestion. I know this will be controversial, but I believe that the low birth rate in Europe and in the West in general is driven primarily by feminism. And I think there needs to be a revision of feminism to allow women to have rights and yet to allow the existence of healthy families. I do think that feminism, especially third-wave feminism, has greatly damaged Western families. Anti-Semitism should be rooted out of political discourse and political policy documents. Israel's right to exist should be explicitly called out in UN documents. European nations should stop funding terrorist regimes or regimes which persecute minorities within their nations. Write laws to bar incremental introduction of Sharia law in the West. The historical facts which desacralize the Quran and discredit the prophetic credentials of Muhammad are well known and should be broadcast into the Islamic world in order to weaken Islam's power and appeal. Do you remember the Radio Free Europe, the Voice of America? They worked before. The Berlin Wall eventually fell. Bring back Radio Free Europe again. This time the minarets will fall. All aid to Islamic countries should be cut off. Write and implement laws which protect free speech from Islamic blasphemy laws and the Islamic law of slander. Set up think tanks to advance the theory of liberal democracy and to make it more robust. Create scholarships for MA and PhD theses on strategically important topics for preserving and strengthening Western civilization. Set up a think tank for the study of Islamic propaganda. The intent of this material. It is hoped that the presentation of this analysis will stimulate a more informed development of national security policy which can help European nations to pull themselves out of the fire. It is hoped that this material will be alarming to Canadians, Americans, and Aussies, and will motivate them to stop the process of Islamization before it has done irreversible damage. Acknowledgement. This presentation would not be possible without the historical data and analysis of Bat-Yor's works. The reader is urged to buy and read Bat-Yor's books, Eurabia, the Euro-Arab Axis, and Europe, Globalization and the Coming Universal Caliphate. These books are to Islam what Alexander Solzhenitsyn's The Gulag Archipelago was to the USSR. Islam's Theft of Europe. This is Abn Alhuriya, Son of Freedom.